This is a question which has been asked so often, so many times by so many people. And I have no doubt many interpretations have been given. And no doubt most of the interpretations of the answers have been given in sincerity by individuals. Obviously, an individual can only give their own interpretation, their own realization, if you like, of God. But I think the greatest mistake of all has been to imply that God is a person, or personality, an individual. I think this has been the greatest drawback to man's realization of things spiritual, of things eternal. The picturization that man upon earth generally has of God is in itself a great drawback to his appreciation and realization of the power of the Holy Spirit. There are some who try to analyze and dissect, and often become in consequence more and more confused. Personally, the whole idea, the whole conception of God can be traced back centuries and centuries and centuries ago to man who felt that there must be some superior being. And because man could not then, possibly any more than he can now, visualize a power or a force, but rather an individual, he created the image and the idea of God. The implication that God is a person has been for so long, in my opinion, a great drawback to the average man's understanding and appreciation of life eternal. Man looks around and about him, and he becomes confused. He listens to the teachings of the various churches, various religious bodies and organizations, and he becomes more and more uncertain and unsure. Each gives its own interpretation, its own idea, without any foundation whatsoever that you might say would satisfy the average intelligent human being. It has been said that God is a spirit. It has been said that God created all things in the beginning. It has been said that it is a world without end. So much has been said in regard to God and the doings of God and the will of God. So much has been blamed upon God. So much that happens in the world that is wrong, that is sad, that is intolerable, is put down to God, inasmuch that God permits it and allows it, because it is God's way. In other words, whether it is good or whether it is bad, God is blamed, or God is praised in accordance with the good that may transpire. How strange it must be to realize that man cannot conceive the very essence, the very power, the very generating force of life is, in a sense, if one must use the expressional term, God. God is not a person. God is not a shape or a form. God does not sit to judge the quick and the dead. He does not have, as it were, a vast domain of which he moves from some golden throne. God is not in this material conception. This is man's material conception and idea of some reigning deity. You see, man, ever since man was, so it seems, created a leader or leaders. In the early stages, tribes had leaders. Later on, countries had kings and emperors, presidents. Someone whom they could look up to, someone whom they could revere, and someone whom they could assume to be the head. Man has always felt the need for someone to be at the head, to lead, to guide, to instruct, to inspire. In other words, humanity has always been inclined to herd together in groups. From that came the idea eventually of separate countries and so on. The history of man shows that man has always desired a leadership. And so when religion first came into being, the man looked around and about him and saw the wonders of nature. And when he began to fear from the storms and the stresses and conditions of life, and he realized that life itself lasted but so short a time, and he felt in his own self there must be something beyond the so-called grave. Man began to conceive of an idea of a great leadership, a great personality, a great God. Man created the idea of God. God, in the sense that man understands it, does not exist. It is true that sometimes we ourselves make references to God, or we make references to the divine power. But I would suggest that this is in many instances necessary, inasmuch that man feels the need for a supreme force or power, which he calls God or Jehovah, whatever it may be. But nevertheless, behind all life is this divine force, which is after all life itself. Without it there could be no existence. But there is not a man-made conception of God. There is no soul that sits to judge or to condemn, to choose and to reject. God is within man. God is within, inasmuch that within man is the indestructible life force, which is, after all, the fundamental and the elemental and the spiritual. It's as if it were and is indeed life itself, the very essence, the very core of man. This is God within. This is the power, the divine force. But we must not confuse and say unto ourselves that we are gods any more than we must assume that there is a God who sits and waits and judges and condemns and praises when necessary. Christ understood, but Christ's teachings themselves has itself been so transformed and so altered, so changed, that the real meaning and interpretation of Christ's mission has been often misconstrued. For I and my Father are one. Man has accepted that as an interpretation that God is a person, and that Christ and God are one. But what is important is not the picturization that it suggests to some of a material, or if you like, a spiritual God sitting on a throne in the material sense. But this is the power, the very life-giving, indestructible force that is life. You are God's inasmuch that within you is indestructible force of life itself. This is the God part, the God-like, if you wish. But we must not confuse or make things more difficult, perhaps even now, to understand. But what I want to convey is that on different stratas of being, according to one's evolution, so obviously comes into being a greater realization of the power which is within oneself. This force, this vitality, this realization, this spiritual power, this whatever you like to call it, because all these things in a sense must be in our terms. That is the point, that we make terms or expressions, so we use these expressions, and by these expressions we assume certain things. But as we progress, so we realize that those terms and expressions, meaning what they seem and what they do at the time, are only in a sense partial revelation or partial experience according to the individual's growth. And there is no such individual as such, as a God, but there is a force and a power which we become more and more conscious of. And as we become more conscious of it, so in consequence we will become more able to realize the potential force and power which can lift us out of certain conditions or spheres of existence into higher ones, where we become more and more able to appreciate and more able to assimilate and become in consequence elevated. More able to become, in a sense, spiritually aware and conscious that there is no God in the sense that God is generally accepted or understood. God is within, but it is a force, it is a power, it is not a person, it is not a shape, it is not a form. God is a realization of oneself, a realization of the possibilities of oneself, inasmuch that one has power and vitality, and one has indestructibility of a spiritual nature and kind. And if we give it shape, it is because we ourselves have shape and form, inasmuch that we have, when on earth, a physical body, and when away from the physical through death, we have an astral body. And when away from the astral planes, we have a spiritual body. But therefore we can give it shape and form, because we have an outer form and shape and covering. But it is a spirit which is God. But God is but a word. It is but a cloak that covers the reality within. Therefore, a term such as God is but a term. And yet it explains nothing and is in a sense nothing. It is the vital force of all life that is God, but it is not shape. If we give it shape, it is because we ourselves assume shape, and feel shape and form is necessary. And while we retain form and shape, so we have within us the power which helps to create us as we evolve into a form of God. But there is no God in the sense that God is understood and accepted. This is a mystery in a sense which has been going on for centuries upon centuries of time. Man prays to God, but really he is praying to the divine force and power of all life which sustains him and makes all things possible, whether in your world or in this. And he calls upon that power and force to aid him and help him, and to guide and to help to uplift him. But it is not a shape or a form. It is not a person who sits and listens. It is a power, it is a vital force which is in all things, whether it is in the most humble thing that falls in your world, or whether it is in a tree or a falling leaf, whether it is in a human being or in a cloud in the sky. And all this is life, and this is God. God is life, not a shape, not a form, not a person, but it is the life-giving force behind all things, which animates and brings into being and makes possible all things that are good and bad. For there is all things in God, and God is in all things, but it is not a person that one must see, but a power, a force, the very life essence itself, that animates and gives us form and shape, and at the same time, without it, we must remember and realize we could not be. There is only eternal existence because of this vital force which is indestructible. You may kill the body, but you cannot kill the spirit. You cannot kill that which is indestructible. This power, this force, this life, this life, the very power, the very spirit, the very part of man that is unseen, and yet the most real of all. That which thou seest is but the outward shape and form, and that which thou seest not, and yet thou sensest and feelest the great reality of inner consciousness. This is man, and without man is God, whether it is in nature, or in human beings, or in the power of the most high spheres. All this is God, but you must seek it in shape or form. By sense it and feel it and know it within your innermost soul, and the realization will come to you of what God is.
Brother Boniface, would it be true to say that the mind a part of us is the God part of us?
In a sense is true, if one can understand in a sense what the mind is. We know that the brain is a sensitive receiving station for the use when upon the earth. The mind, the realization, the consciousness, this in a sense is God. It is the vehicle, if you like, the expression. It is a sensitive part which makes possible the realization of all things. Mind, consciousness, realization. Without consciousness, realization, there could be no life, of course. There could be no conscious existence. This, in a sense, is God. It is very difficult to define, because you cannot define the undefinable. One can only say that it is these things of which I speak. These powers, these forces, these life-giving, vital parts, which in themselves are the essence and strength and realization of life of man, these are the things which are, in a sense, what you term God. But we must get away, we must take away from man this pagan idea that God is a person, that God is a great strength. We must remember that God cannot be confined in such a small space. There is no realization, it seems, in your world of the reality of the power of the Holy Spirit. And I use the term the Holy Spirit because this is a term which has become familiar. But we must remember that all these expressions, all these terms, are what man himself has created through generations of time. They serve a purpose, they help to give an idea, but they cannot give the full realization of what lies behind these things. As man progresses slowly but surely, whether on your side or on this, he has realization, he has the ability to see and to know, to experience within limits, within certain degrees, within certain boundaries. But we must first of all break down the narrow conception that man often has of what God is. God is not a man. God is not a shape or a form. God is a power, the power underlying all life, the very power that makes life possible. This is God. It's very difficult to explain.
Yes, but with a true exception of God, we should have a greater love in our world, certainly a greater love for the things of God, especially for the animal kingdoms that must live.
I think until man realizes his responsibility not only to his neighbor, but unto all forms of life that exist, and realize that they are all in varying stages of evolution, that each and every thing that is part of his kingdom, part of himself, for you are all constructed from the same. And so it seems to me that since you all have, as it were, the same roots, that you must learn to live in harmony and in peace together. You must appreciate the most lowly before you yourself become high. So much has been said and so much has been misconstrued in the past. But unless you love all that is, you cannot hope yourself to raise yourself above the mundane and the ordinary. You want to be true mentally aware and conscious and spiritually uplifted to the extent that you can see into the world of the spirit and in a sense still become part of it while yet on earth. You must learn to live in peace and in tranquility and in harmony and in love with all things, knowing that it is the same vital force and power that flows through all, that you are all indeed entwined and indeed part of each other. It is wrong to make war upon yourselves, as so often man does, without perhaps fully realizing it, without even perhaps always being conscious of it. There is much that is good within, that can be brought forth and developed and used to greater advantage for the welfare of the human race. But to this must often sacrifice oneself. Sacrifice is not an easy thing, but nevertheless those who would approach the higher states of being must learn often to put themselves more and more into the background, to become more and more attuned with others, especially those whose needs are many and great. One must indeed sometimes forget self to the extent that you may seem almost to be negligible, and yet it is only then that you can hope to perceive and grow in consequence mentally and spiritually. I do not think people realize how necessary it is to be humble. All the great teachers and all the great prophets of old invariably, without exception I'm sure, realized this was a secret. That to become great, not the less of greatness in the sense that some accept the term, but to seek and to find the kingdom of God, to find the realization of the power of the Holy Spirit and to manifest it and to use it, it meant that they themselves must become most low before they themselves in turn could become the high. Christ realized so much more than the average, so much more than most of the prophets of the past. He was the supreme example. He understood these truths. And so it seems to me that if one is to progress spiritually, one must be prepared to be humble, because only in humbleness and contriteness of heart can one hope to perceive the wisdom that will set one free from the shackles of the mundane and the material. This has been proved over and over again. The greatest strength lies on what appears to be weakness. No one need fret or worry unduly concerning the nature of God. This is a question that is often asked, and it is indeed most difficult to answer, because we on this side, realizing as we do, that there is so much that cannot be revealed and cannot be understood, even if we could reveal it. Know that God is not an individual. That God is a force and a power that is within each and every one of us. In some it is much more submerged, particularly when on earth, It can be so brought forth within us that it will shine in such a way that it will illumine our path forever. No one need fear, and so much has been built up on the fear of God. This, in my opinion, is one of the cruelest and the worst things that has been taught by man, because it gives a very false and wrong impression, the wrong idea, and oftentimes makes men do things contrary to their nature. Often it is done because of fear. That which is done through fear is not good, for all must be done, but is done in love. For by love are we truly enabled to grow mentally and spiritually and gather knowledge and experience. But that which is done through fear is bad, for nothing is gained through fear. Fear of consequences often makes a person do some contrary. This is not true loving, this is not true realizing, this is not true giving or doing. One must do all things in sincerity, in love and in brotherliness. Then it is good. That which is done through fear is bad. I know there will be those who will be perturbed. There will be those who cannot quite see, and those who will not see. There will be those who will still cling to the old idea of things, the old image that has been created. For in all things, an image must often be created for people to understand. I appreciate and realize the difficulties. And although an individual may accept a religious creed or dogma because of the image, if themselves yet find a way of truth, or find a way of progress for themselves and for those near and dear to them, that is good. But we must remember above all things, the truth will only be revealed as the individual themselves make it possible. In other words, we ourselves can find revelation only by our efforts, only by our realization of the possibility within ourselves. And when we have that realization, then it is as if the door is unlocked, and we can gradually see for the first time the possibility that lies within. For as Christ said, it is within ourselves. We have within us the power to know many things. We have the power within us to make many things possible. Our faith in itself can remove mountains. But we must remember that faith and love go hand in hand, and that if we work in love and in faith for enlightenment, for truth, it should be revealed unto us. We must not allow anything to stand in the path of spiritual progress. We must forget ourselves in true love and in true service, and in that way we find the peace which love cannot give, that peace which passeth all understanding, that peace which brings to us that joy and content which is eternal. Do not fear nor fret. Know that within yourself is the answer. Within yourself is the possibility of greatness, true spiritual greatness. For as Christ said, we are one in spirit and in truth, and within each and all there is the power of the divine, and in this power we are truly brothers, we are truly eternal, inasmuch that death can have no sin, no fear for us, for we shall overcome, and as we overcome, so shall revelation become more and more clear, more and more able shall we be able to discern the wisdom of the Most High. Be in good faith, my children. Peace be unto you.
Thank you very much, Boniface.